I want to tell you a story about a transformation. I want to tell you a story about the conversation that preceded that transformation. This is about a woman losing 80 pounds after having a kid, and I had about this much to do with it. Now, I'm in Whole Foods. This was several months ago. There's a Whole Foods by my house. I'm in there. I'm grabbing pre-cut fruit because I don't want to cut my own fruit before I eat it. Anyways, I'm stumbling in there. It's at the end of my day. I don't think I was expecting to have some significant conversation, but I get a tap on the shoulder and I turn around and it's this woman immaculately dressed in a stylish pantsuit, probably from J. Crew. She's vibrant. She's smiling at me like I'm a long lost friend. She looks healthy. I also don't recognize her. I have no idea who this is. And she said, "Spencer, hi, it's Jan." And I do what, probably you do and most people do, where you don't want to admit that you don't know who this person is because they seem to be really excited to see you. And so I go, "Hey, how's it going?" Like she's my best friend and like I only saw her yesterday. And she says, and this what reminded me who she was. She said, "It's been about 10 years and Bjorn is about to enter into St. Mark's." Now, the second that she said Bjorn, I knew who she was. One, because that's an unusual name. I remember the first time that she said it was about 10 years ago and that it sounded like the name of a Viking. And so the second she said that, I remembered the last time that I saw her. And the thing about that is that it gave me a punch to the gut because the conversation that I remember was not a pleasant one. It wasn't a conversation where I think it would precede her being excited to see me. What I remember in my head is that I said something offensive to her and she stormed out of the coffee shop. So as this is going down, I'm trying to keep a smile on my face and listen to her, but in my mind, I think I am so confused about one, why she's excited to see me. Does she have amnesia? Did she forget the last time that we actually saw each other? And she finishes by saying this. She says, "Hey, I want to thank you for the conversation that we had those many years ago. No one had ever spoken to me like that, and believe it or not, it really helped. Great running into you." Now, I'm even further baffled. I remember leaving the grocery store and not even getting the pre-cut fruit. I was so confused at how this thing that I remember was clearly different than what she remembered. So I go home and I try to reverse engineer this previous meeting. And I remember that it was at a coffee shop. It's called the Pearl Cup. It's now closed. I remember that it was a referral from someone who knew someone that knew her that thought that we should connect because I could potentially help her as a coach. I remember she sat down, and as I mentioned at the beginning, she was about 80 pounds overweight. She had mascara that was smeared just a little bit, that looked like maybe it had been applied the day before. She looked like she hadn't slept in a few days. She was wearing Lululemon, but I could tell that she was uncomfortable. Despite that, she shows up with a big smile on her face. Now, 10 years ago, I'd like to think that I'm not the coach that I am today, but to the best of my ability, I wanted to ask questions where I could understand what is the problem that we are trying to overcome. But I couldn't get anywhere. She had an 11-month-old kid, and despite that obvious plot development, every time I asked, "What's the problem? What are the goals?" it was like she was giving me 1 millisecond of this story or this really long film. And she would finish it by saying, "Yeah, but everything's pretty great." Either by my lack of influence, ability, or whatever it was. I'll tell you what it was. At this time, unbeknownst to her, I had a kid the exact same age as her. I had my first daughter who was 10 or 11 months old. And so I know, looking back, that I had one of the few times in my life the exact same stage that she was going through. And I can tell you, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I had zero empathy. It wasn't, "Oh, well, you have a kid, I have a kid." I knew that I was trying, and I'm just being honest with you, I was trying a lot harder than what it seemed like she was trying to be better. And the words, unfortunately, that came out of my mouth probably weren't words that were filled with the empathy that she needed. Now that's as far as I could get as I was recalling the story. So I knew, gosh, there had to be something that was missing. There had to be some beautiful sentence that I said that I didn't remember. And because I'm always trying to get better, I had to go on a witch hunt to get in contact with Jan. And fortunately, we have a database, as I'm sure lots of coaches have, of emails. And so after some digging, I found Jan's email. And I emailed her, and I've printed out her response. Because in the email, I said, hey, it was great running into you. But I'm going to be honest with you. I remember our last interaction as one that wasn't great. I remember I said something at the end of the conversation that offended you, and that we abruptly stopped this consultation. Can you help me with some of those details? She was gracious enough to respond, and this is what she said. Spencer, again, great to see you. You were offensive, but you were also the first person that said things to me that were true and didn't so worry about saying the right thing to make me feel like it was all okay and to keep wearing this mask that I was clearly wearing. I needed to hear that. You told me, and I quote, "You don't have good enough reasons for me to coach you." Probably don't say that to somebody. But she goes on to say, I needed to hear that. I learned two things from our conversation, and it didn't happen overnight either. I was scared, to be honest with you. Being honest seemed weak. Ultimately, I had to recognize the real challenges I had, and I realized that you could have a baby that's a blessing, but also it be a really big struggle at the same time. Remember that, parents. What I wish all parents would realize, and you helped me do this, is that there can be an obstacle and you can be healthy, and you can choose both to address the obstacle and take care of yourself. Choosing both leads to escalation. That means it will make parenting harder when you choose not to eat the goldfish your kids have, get up earlier, not watch as much Netflix. Secondly is this, I didn't have to win being healthy. I just had to try. I was overweight for several years after having Bjorn. My intentions, not wins, continued to evolve, though as Bjorn got older and well, it felt easier to try. I hope that helps, and thanks again for the straight talk. I needed that. So, my name is Spencer. I love coaching. I love trying to get better at it. I think coaching is an art. I hope that you don't take from this recording that you got to talk like a jerk to your clients. That's not the point of this. The point in reverse engineering that conversation is that one, I definitely could have had better tact. I definitely could have massaged the conversation better. I probably shouldn't have let my frustration or the fact that I was going through the same thing that she was going through get in the way of further guiding this conversation to something that clearly was more substantial, that she could be more vulnerable with me. And so in this conversation, I want to break down exactly what I've learned over several years of how to craft a client. You don't sell clients, but you do create them. And I want to break that down into two distinct ways and lines of questioning that I think that if you can be fearless enough to stay in that inquiry, then you can start a great relationship with any client you choose to coach. So despite what you think, nobody needs coaching. Coaching is a want, it's not a need. Without coaching, each person's life is going to continue to unfold in some, let's call it like a default setting. If this is some graph, it's going to keep going at this exactly horizontal line without any coaching from you or any coaching from me. For anyone to participate in coaching, it's our goal for them to want it. If someone is to want coaching, then there's two things, and hopefully it's both of these things, that you and they need to agree upon is the reason that they're sitting there. Now, most people like Jan come in with a fraction of that. They come in with a fraction because one, nobody wants to appear weak. Two, to really boldly claim that they have this incredibly audacious goal that they have seems immature. For most people, they haven't given themselves permission to even say something out loud that evokes judgment, ridicule. And so if you get nothing else from this conversation, understand that just you sitting there with them is an attempt for them to feel comfortable with you. That's something that could take several sessions. And when you think about it, that makes complete sense. Why would a stranger at a coffee shop want to tell me everything that's going on? You got to earn that right. Now, the best coaches, I can tell you, have the ability to bring that out and the ability to be fearlessly in a position to continually ask questions until they can arrive at that. For the rest of us, yeah, it may take more conversations, longer intakes, further consultations. But the whole purpose is this: to determine and believe that what they want is so significantly different and overwhelming from their default setting that they want coaching. And furthermore, that you're the guy that has the plan that's going to get them there. Now, one little caveat, one little sidebar before we get into the specific lines of questions that you can ask and the specific topics that you want to have answers to before you ever opt into coaching someone, is why are we like this? I believe, and this is just my opinion, that conveying weakness or some really audacious, big, lofty goal is foolhardy. And that if you convey these things, it means it's not just a fleeting thought or feeling, but it's the personification of who you are. If we as clients and even as facilitators of these conversations could make a distinction between those two, hey, saying this out loud doesn't mean that you are this. It doesn't mean you're the embodiment of that, is a great distinction to make. But here's the irony. You can't enter into a great story unless there's some large distance between who you are and what you want. So if there's no distance, there's no story. And if there's no story, there's no reason to want to coach. So hear this. Our first job as coaches, before you get to come with a plan, before you get to actually coach, is to strengthen the conflict for why they came in. That's right. It's like you're trying to agitate this tiny little problem that they mentioned and continually ask questions until you can figure out why that even matters. This has been talked about ad nauseum, but one of the ways that I like to say this is your clients have a client. Your clients have a person that they really care about. Your clients have a cause that maybe they aren't even aware that they're a part of. And you want to ask enough questions where you understand the dreams about their dreams. It's the inception layer. It's continually asking questions. It's not feeling like you have to be omnipotent and fill in the blanks for what your clients are trying to say, but question the answers that they have until you arrive at something that feels big, where it feels like you've agitated this distance. Now, you can create distance in two ways, and that's what we're going to finish the talk with. One is the obstacle, and two, we'll call the intention. There's lots of ways to use synonyms for this, but let's talk about obstacles. I look at this in a series of questions as ways that we might start to create more and more distance between where they are and really where they need to be. I look at this as internal obstacles and then external. External is things like a person or persons. In the example of Jan, it's not that her baby was evil, but being a parent, it's very clear that your kids create and generate lots of obstacles that you have to overcome. And they didn't exist before they did. Secondly, it's the environment. One of the questions I love to ask is, hey, what does your work environment look like? What does your home environment look like? Hey, what does your husband, wife, partner, roommate think about this? What are the things that you're doing to celebrate, to decompress? These all have to relate to these external obstacles that for lots of us aren't always healthy. For lots of us, they're things that don't benefit us. There's things that create a rift and a distance between the person that we want to be, or more appropriately, the person that we definitely don't want to be. As well, there's physical limitations. There's things that are outside of our control. These could be literally constraints that we can't do anything about, but we need to recognize. And then there's internal. This to me is way more interesting. External's cool. We got to know it. We got to ask the questions. Hey, what are the other stakeholders in your life, and what is it that they're doing to influence these set of circumstances that you find yourself in? But if you were to corner me and say, what is something that you know, if you ask enough questions, everybody will arrive at an answer for, it's this. Are you ready? There is an internal obstacle in each one of us that has to do with fear. There is something that deep down we don't want to experience. There is something rattling around in our head that tells us that we're unworthy. There's something rattling around in our head that tells us that we are not lovable. there's something rattling around in our heads that says, hey, we're unknown and there's nothing that we could do to become known. Those 4 things, that's a deep level of questioning, but you want to continue to ask questions until you hear what it is that they fear, what they feel like is unworthy, what they feel like is unloved, what they feel like is unknown. And your job is to challenge those. Your job is to incorporate some way of getting unstuck in their head, defunking the dysfunctional ways that they act out to compensate for some of these obstacles. And even though that sounds very vague and esoteric, there are very actionable steps that once you hear that, you can start to experiment with. It doesn't mean that you as the coach needs to be perfect, but man, it sure helps to know what the real problem is before you start to go in and design behavior modifications. So those are the obstacles. And that's almost like painting what the real floor is. There's variations of this line of questioning where you'd want to really agitate that. You'd want to take that concept of, hey, this is what it looks like today. What would it look like if you didn't change anything and it was 20 years from now? You can look up through NLP and Tony Robbins an exercise called the Dickens process that does just that. But the whole concept is this: we want to be acutely aware and honest and realistic with the things that are preventing us from living the life that we want to live. And if you're asking these questions and it looks like there's no emotional response, I'm here to tell you that you're not there yet, even though it may be emotional for you. If they can say it like a stone cold robot, you're not there yet. Keep asking. Once you do, though, the other line of questioning that you want to continue to ask until you feel like you have some juice is intentions. Intentions could be exchanged with the word goals. It could be exchanged with the word dreams, but there's internal and external as well. From an external standpoint, if you're a performance coach, it's obvious that you would want to ask what it means for them to win. That could be something as seemingly insignificant as a small little race that they want to participate in. That could be something as big as the job that they've just signed on to do professionally. That could be something from a parental standpoint, from a marital standpoint. There are so many ways to figure out what it means to win for that person. And most people have a very tiny, appropriate answer to that question. And part of what you're doing is, if previously you want to agitate it and make it worse, you want to blow it up and make it even bigger. You want to question if that's it. That's all you got? And you can do that in a very tactful way, but you do want to understand what it means for them to win. In addition to that, was they want to stop. The trans-theoretical model of change, what you're going to stop typically has way more juice than what you want to start. Sometimes we'll ask the question, what is it that you want to escape? What is it that you want to find? If you wanted to get somewhere, what would that thing look like? Paint me a picture of the most detailed place that you would want to arrive for this thing that you say is important. And then lastly, ever so often, a great question is, what are you trying to rescue? What are you trying to retrieve? In the context of being a parent, your kids arrive at a certain age where I'm convinced we try to rescue who we once were. We try to retrieve some of those components of our own identity that we've sloughed off because this kid's going to kill himself unless we watch him every second of the day. Now, those are external. Those are things outside of us. Just like the obstacles to overcome, the intentions on an internal level, man, if you can tap into that, you've got something. Those include love. Get somebody to admit how they want to work with you so they can feel love. Is there anything more powerful? How can they atone for something that's happened in their past? How can they find justice? How can they find duty? How can they find redemption? And maybe the most important, how can you create and connect these silly, daily, simple practices that connect them to their own self-respect? That right there, ladies and gentlemen, it's the beauty of coaching. It is making new connections with something that they never thought would lead them towards a new identity. And every time they do it, it makes a deposit in this bucket of self-respect. You know, by trade, I'm a health and fitness coach. Nothing I've said in this entire recording has anything specifically to do with fitness. But in my mind, it has everything to do with it. And And the longer I coach, the longer I'm willing to sit in this, let's be honest, often uncomfortable conversation until I can hear in my mind, this is somebody that has a compelling story that I want to be part of. As coaches, we can't magically get somebody to say something. I don't really have control over anybody that I get to work with. I'd like to think I have a great influence. I like to think that I'm responsible for the questions I ask, the fearlessness I have as I show up in a session and say, I'm not going anywhere until I get to the bottom of this. But also the fearlessness to realize, like, hey, this person needs some time. This person's not ready. If I had Jan to do all over again, I wouldn't say that exactly like I said it, but I think that the sentiment is true. Jan, it's been wonderful talking to you. I think that you need some more time to think about what it is that you really want. And until there's a deep desire for coaching, until there's a huge want for it, I don't know if I can really help you. That was probably a much better way to say what I should have said. But what I want to leave you with is this. Our job as coaches is to spend a lot of time here. Once we get that, it's not our job to omnipotently figure out the perfect way to have that go down. Our job is to come alongside the client and get them to try. Your client doesn't have to win. And I know that's a crazy thing to say in this world of coaching where we assume like, hey, we are omnipotent and we do have the answers and they should have the outcomes that they're saying. But if you think about it, everybody's life does have an unknown trajectory. We don't know how the journey's going to unfold. But I think what's a good philosophical ending point is to say that our intentions evolve as obstacles mount and the journey unfolds. I make these videos and this one's, very on the nose for myself. I wish that I had had these 10 years ago to listen to ask better questions, to be comfortable sitting in an uncomfortable conversation. And I make them for you because I think you don't have to be working in a gym. I don't think you have to be getting paid for this to realize that these type of conversations are the juice. They're the essence of what it means to be a human being. And so I hope that this is valuable to you, and thank you for listening.